Hi. I really like that you danced. That was pretty good. So my name is Johannes Hoppe, and I need to push that button. Yeah. My name is Johannes Hoppe, and I do research in the field of work psychology. So usually we do research with employees and organizations, and now with students. But in the last years, I saw so many students not getting their shit done, including me. And that's when I got curious about this phenomenon of procrastination. And I think there are damn lazy students, because I know that because I'm one of them. But I think also true is that there are circumstances at university that can foster this kind of laziness. And this is the key message. I think if we talk about failure at university or in society, then we are pretty fast at attributing this failure to individual guilt. But I think only blaming students for their procrastination problem doesn't solve the problem at all. So that's the thing we really need to change. And talking about procrastination, this is the time I had for preparing this TED talk. It's like 6 days. But what I actually did was this. I needed a couple of time to make this diagram, to search images, to manipulate images like that, watch other TED Talks, and prepare animations. Preparing animations is my specialty. And I actually did the bloody TED Talk was like 8% of the time. So all that stuff kept me from doing what I actually wanted to do. And my question to you is, who of you knows these kinds of situations? Please raise your hand real quick. Thank you. And that pretty much confirms my thesis that everybody procrastinates from time to time. So procrastination is no illness, it's behavior. And there's a very nice comic from Sarah Anderson, and she illustrates procrastination perfectly. I love her. So procrastination is if we postpone things on purpose, although we know it's a bad idea. That's procrastination. And to find the explanation for this behavior is very complicated, but there are a couple of ideas. And first is that it is a self-regulation failure, and that fear and avoidance play a role, and that short-term versus long-term gratification are important. And important to differentiate is that I talk about everyday procrastination. There's something called chronic procrastination. And chronic procrastination is about if you put off things in your life, like going to the doctor, writing your tax declaration, or your master thesis. So a lot of things in your life, if you put them off again and again, and the problems are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, so you get into a vicious circle you can't get out by yourself, and that's a very severe problem. But I'm not going to talk about that today. Maybe you know the very cool and inspiring TED Talk by Tim Urban about procrastination. And he introduced real-life MRT images of his brain to explain what happens inside the brain of a procrastinator. So these images are kind of nasty, but I hope you can stand that. So these are the images he used. And he says that if everything goes well, the so-called rational decision maker takes control of our actions. And for example, as I said, I had 6 days for my TED Talk. And the rational decision maker in my brain, he distributes the workload equally over those 6 days, if everything goes well. But then the instant gratification monkey shows up. And the instant gratification monkey, in my case, says, hey, did you already watch the latest science fiction movie trailers? Or didn't you want to buy a new backpack? Better look that up in the internet right now. So that's the instant, everybody knows instant gratification monkey, yeah? And yeah, so that makes me sometimes do all the work on the last day of my deadline. So that's what we call procrastination. And my question is, what can we do against procrastination? And I really like the metaphor of a huge mountain. You stand there at the foot of the huge mountain and you look up. I will never, ever gonna do that. That's a big problem. And big problems that are difficult, hard to reach, and very complex are those tasks we procrastinate more often. So my advice is to do following. specify what you want to achieve. And not only specify what you want to achieve, but also specify steps in between. We say to reduce a complex and difficult goals into steps of achievable sub-goals. And I think that has 2 points. First is that sometimes if problems are very big, we are not capable of planning ahead. So reducing complexity can help us to plan ahead, to make good decisions on how we want to do what. The second thing is that if you look on the top of the hill, it's like your master thesis or bachelor thesis. Who of you writes a master or bachelor thesis right now? It's okay, some of you. On your first day of your master or bachelor thesis, you look and say, I will never gonna do that. It's so tough, I don't know even how to start. Yeah, and that's the point here. So you need to subdivide and make it more feasible, because it's, at first, when you look on top, it's a very tough problem. But if you reduce it into small packets of things you can handle, then I think this is more easy. Okay, so here's a slide I actually don't want to show you, but it took me like 1 hour to make it, so enjoy. Okay. Woo, nice one, huh? It was like Thursday at 4 p.m. I really didn't want to work on this presentation, so I made this animation. And it was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed it a lot. But this was the reason I almost didn't make the deadline today. But speaking about deadlines, there's another nice comic by Sarah Anderson about what motivates people. Yeah, so it's fear, not the desire to, sometimes it's desire to improve the world, but not always, it's fear. Okay, so I agree with that. It's a good metaphor, but I think it's valid for, deadlines that are like tomorrow. Then I'm very eager to do it because fear is useful. But imagine you have a deadline that is 6 months away. What does fear produce then? And she has one last comic, which is pretty cool too. Yeah, so this huge mountain again, it's a huge rock this time, illustrates that those large things, I don't want to do that. I prefer the small ones. So split up the evil deadline in the end. I need to hand in my bachelor thesis into more frequent and smaller deadlines. That's the first thing. And the second thing, one of my students once told me, Johannes, it's a good idea. Just call it guideline. Don't call it deadline. And I really like that idea. Okay. So I talked a lot about guys in my brain and in your brains controlling what we do. I really like the metaphor, and sometimes I hear them talk to me when I procrastinate. But there's a catch in it, I think, when you talk about guys sitting in our brains. And procrastination is a psychological phenomenon. And you could argue that individual motivation plays a role, like if I am intrinsically motivated to do a special task. You can say that personality is important. For example, if you are self-disciplined and organized, then you procrastinate less, and that individually learned strategies could be important. For example, how you learn to write or how you learn to learn. But I think this is true, but only part of the problem, or part of the truth. You could also argue that supervision, task, and context play a role. For example, if I have a deadline, I set myself and I don't meet my own deadline, what happens? Nothing, most of the time. But if you don't meet a deadline that comes from your supervisor, your lecturer, or your boss, it could literally mean you're dead in the end if you don't meet that. So it has a different effect. So what the supervisor does at university can affect the procrastination behavior of the student. Also, the task. We know that there are certain tasks who are more likely to be postponed. For example, tasks that I'm not sure how to do them, if they are uncertain or ambiguous, or tasks that are too difficult, or if I don't like to do a certain task. And the supervisor can influence those tasks. That's what we believe. And also the context plays a role. For instance, if you have a small kid at home, if you have an extra job, or you get paid by your family, or if you need to do your bachelor in 2 or 4 years, all that can influence procrastination behavior. But if you look at the causes for procrastination, here is what happens. the person is seen as the main cause for procrastination, whereas the influence of the situation is underestimated. Just Google, for example, what can I do against my procrastination? Guess what happens? There are a lot of advices on self-help books, self-optimization, and psychological treatments. And don't get me wrong about that, I like those books. And I'm sure psychological treatment does work. But if you focus only on the person, you exclude the situation, and that's a problem. Concerning the situation, as I said before, you could design tasks in a certain way, and the supervisor is able to design that task because he can determine, for example, how the situation is the student works in. Also, you could design context, which means you can design a study program. We can say that you can either change behavior or change the situation. So where's the problem in excluding the situation here? Imagine you write your bachelor or master thesis and you sit in the library. You are self-disciplined and organized and motivated. You start at 8, finish at 5, and you do that 1 week. Everything is perfect. Second week, you start a little bit Facebook, a little bit YouTube. Third week, you spend more time on Facebook than on your thesis. I saw that. I saw people doing that. And the question is, are you not self-disciplined enough in that moment? Yes, you are. You're not motivated enough. But maybe your discipline and your motivation is not the only root of evil. Maybe also the supervisor has played a role, for example, because he didn't give you feedback. Or maybe because he did not make clear what performance he expects from you. But if you blame yourself as the only reason for your procrastination behavior, you feel bad about that. You feel guilt. You feel the problem is getting even bigger and bigger. So that's why if we exclude the situation, we can even enhance the problem and not solving it. I think that's a problem. Good self-help books and psychological treatment will always ask you to change your behavior and change the situation. You cannot change either or, you need to change both because both interact. The thing is that at university sometimes students are not able to change their situation because the supervisor does. And at that point it has a political dimension because if you ask how can we avoid or prevent procrastination behavior, you can have two ideas. First is to attribute it to individual guilt, the failure. That would mean that's what I observe, but it's a thesis, I cannot prove it, that you form a system of competition at university. We all experience competition. And I think that even enhances the problem and doesn't solve it. The other perspective is to change the situation. If you say, maybe we should change university programs, teaching and supervision, then this would mean to give courses to lecturers. And I think both is necessary. You don't need this or that, you need both. That's the point. And if you speak about teaching, I hear it, I'm afraid I get the call tomorrow that someone tells me, Johannes, what did you tell? The teacher is responsible for students to procrastinate. I think it's not true. If we think about improving the teaching, then it's not a matter of effort or heart. It's a matter of time and money. My contract lasts 2 years. After that, I need to go. I guess 60% of all lecturers and supervisors have short-term contracts at university. And they get paid for 20 hours a week, although they work 50 or 60 hours a week. And that really is a thing we need to change. Speaking about change, 2 things you please do not forget. First, please take procrastination seriously. Compared to employees at the same age, students are less sick in general. But if you watch at diagnosis for anxiety disorders or depression, if you look for psychological treatments, if you look for antidepressants, students get that more frequently than employees. Of course, that can have many reasons, but I'm sure procrastination is a piece of the puzzle. Second thing is, please do not blame only one side. Avoid monocausal explanations. Do not go to your supervisor and tell him you are to be blamed because of my procrastination behavior. Same thing in a different way. Don't go to the student and tell him you are responsible for your own procrastination behavior. I think it's an interaction and you need to improve both. Solving ambiguous tasks or problems is part of scientific process. Students need to go through that, and if there are some people who do not master that, then they should look for alternatives. That's right. But I think it's our responsibility to open up the door for anyone who tries. And I think it's our responsibility to not only blame one side. Thank you very much.